Misfortune is moving back up the tier list, Brand will be dropping down, and which champ do you guys think is in most need of a buff or nerf right now? And remember, if you're struggling to climb in League, SkillCapped is the only place that guarantees you'll climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service. Otherwise, you can claim a full refund. We do this because our service really works, and this is the best time of the season to get in on SkillCapped, as we've just released tons of site-exclusive courses designed for you to power learn the most important concepts for climbing in League of Legends stupidly fast, compared to those who don't use SkillCapped. Join today for unlimited access to the world's most famously effective League of Legends guides, and remember, one subscription gives you access to all of our other games as well. So what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description below to stop wasting time being hard stuck and get the rank you actually want. And with that said, let's get into it. A few of the more impactful changes to the patch are not actually direct champion adjustments and instead changes to runes. Dark Harvest will have its cooldown lowered from 45 to 40 seconds. Damage is also being adjusted with the base value dropping. However, you'll now gain more damage per each stack. So you're now going to get a lot more value out of the stacking element of Dark Harvest, which should make the rune more appealing for champions that have strong poke power or are looking to skirmish a bunch. Dark Harvest had kind of fallen out of meta on supports like Vel'Koz, Xerath, Brand, Lux, and Zyra as of recent, but these changes should make the rune stronger for them. It's definitely a more feast or famine rune now though, so if you're not able to acquire very many stacks, the rune will be weaker than before. Electrocute is going to be getting a boost to its damage early on in the game, but it will fall off a bit the later games go. Cooldown on Electrocute is being lowered, so the rune is now really going to fit that niche as being the snowbally early game option. Someone like LeBlanc should really benefit from the direction of these changes, as her early game bully strength gets even better. A champ like Evelynn, on the other hand, may not be liking the changes as much since she's not as early game dominant. One of the more controversial items in recent patches has been Opportunity, so Riot will be nerfing the passive lethality, but for ranged champions only. The decaying movement speed from the passive is actually going up though from 150 to 200, so it's actually a buff to all melee champions that run the item. Will be a net nerf overall for ranged though, and hurt champs like Varus, Corki, Senna, and Kalista the most. Kalista is actually being directly nerfed this patch as well, so she's really going to be on the downswing. With the item and rune changes covered, let's move on to looking at what we've got going on up in the top lane. Gangplank is going to receive a buff to his E slow, as it will no longer scale with crit and instead just provide a more significant base slow amount. Base slow is going from 30 scaling to 60% to 40 scaling to 80%, so you got a little more kiting strength early on in the game with your Trinity Force completion before you have the ability to build the Collector and Infinity Edge. Does this change really influence the strength of Gangplank in meta though? We don't expect it to, so he's going to remain in the top lane B tier for now. Pantheon is being issued a very minor buff for this patch, with his W damage going up from 50 to 60. It is more guaranteed damage to Pantheon's all-in combo, so it's not a completely useless buff, but we don't see it being enough to push Panth into the S tier, so he'll continue to be placed in A. Gragas has been more problematic up in the top lane than in the jungle as of recent, so Riot's looking to address that for 14.13. They're doing this by reducing the Fat Man's passive healing, as the max health heal is dropping from 6.5 to 5.5%. Of course, this will also negatively influence jungle Gragas, but it does hit top lane more significantly, as the sustain from passive is a big factor in why top lane Gragas can be so oppressive. We've had Gragas in the top lane S tier for 14.12, but as a result of this nerf, we'll be shifting him down into A tier. Kennen has been one of the more under the radar strong solo queue tops as of recent, and Riot thinks he's in need of a nerf. They'll be reducing the early game laning strength of Kennen by making him more vulnerable to all-in plays, as his base health is dropping from 611 to 580. Kennen could still be a very fringe S tier pick even after this nerf, but we think he will be losing a decent amount of power, so we're moving him into A tier. Skarner is being nerfed in a few ways that will more heavily impact his strength in the top lane than in the jungle. Mana cost on Q is going up from 30 to 50, which is much more detrimental for top lane. Q2 max health damage is dropping from 15 to 10%, which is a pretty sizable nerf as well. We definitely think Skarner will be losing a substantial amount of power due to these changes, so we're dropping him out of the top lane S tier and into A. The strongest carries from 14.12 are going to reign supreme for another patch, as we've got Set and Volibear rated as two of the most OP top laners. With all the changes to Varus for this patch, it will be interesting to track how that affects the strength of the champion up in the top lane. W max has always been the way to go for Varus top, and it's actually getting buffed for 14.13, with more on-hit damage being added to W at max rank. There are a bunch of other changes that will influence his strength as well though, so it's tough to say exactly where the champ will land power-wise, so we'll place him in B for now and adjust if need be for the mid-patch update. Even though Zac is more popular in the jungle, the nerfs buffs he's receiving for this patch will influence his strength as a top laner. Passive healing is going down up until level 9, so this definitely hurts the laning power of top Zac. Zac has really been overperforming in recent patches though, so even with the nerf, we still expect him to remain in a good spot and won't be moving him down the tier list for now. There are a bunch of junglers being changed for this patch, and first up is Graves. Riot's providing Graves with some added durability as they're increasing his E armor per stack from 2 scaling to 14 to 4 scaling to 16. If there's any way that Graves makes his way back into meta for this patch, it's more so going to be due to many of the AP junglers becoming weaker in combination with this buff. Graves has fared fairly poorly analytically against Nidalee, Lilia, and Taliyah in recent patches, and this buff does not do anything to address that issue. Buff will make the champ a solid counter pick if you can pilot him well, but we don't see Graves pushing into the upper percentile, so he'll remain in the B tier. Similar to Graves, Lee Sin will be given some more durability for next patch, with his health per level going from 105 to 108. W shield is also being increased by a whole 20 shielding at rank 1. Pretty nice buff to Lee W here, as an early game buff for a champ like Lee who wants to be pushing the issue is quite impactful. As a result of these buffs, we'll be moving Lee out of the jungle B tier and up into A. Karthus is going to be nerfed yet again, and Riot's targeting his Q damage for a second time, as it's being lowered from 43 scaling to 119 to 40 scaling to 116. Karthus has been on the fence between A and B tier over the past patch, so as a result of this nerf, he's going to solidify a spot in the B tier. Riot's not holding back with these Taliyah nerfs, as they are looking to significantly influence the strength of her clear. Q-based bonus damage to monsters is dropping from 25 down to 10, while there will no longer be an AP ratio on this bonus damage, as it's going from 5 to 0%. With Taliyah's Q being her main damage source and the fact she can spam it out so consistently, she's going to be much worse off moving forward. With this nerf, we'll be moving Taliyah down the jungle tier list, as she'll be joining Karthus in the B tier. The Zac changes that Riot have planned more heavily influence his strength in the early game, as they are changing the way his passive healing scales. Instead of scaling based on the rank of Zac's R, the healing will now scale based on his level. Riot has stated that this will be a nerf up until level 9, but from then on out, it will be neutral to where it was in 14.12. Jungle Zac has just been barely holding onto an S tier spot in recent patches, so with the nerf, we're going to be dropping him into A tier. So with all the jungle changes out of the way, let's have a look at how the tier list is shaping up. OP tier is going to remain the same as where we had it for last patch, with Lilia taking up the only OP slot. Lilia gets even better for this patch as well, due to Brand, Taliyah, and Karthus all dropping in power. Shyvana has slowly but surely made her way back into meta for solo queue over the past few patches for a couple of different reasons. Champs like Shyvana and Nocturne, who are very level 6 reliant, have both seen a considerable uptick in strength due to the jungle XP changes from back in 14.10. Shiv with her R is just a completely different champion, so a faster level 6 spike is much more impactful for her than most other junglers. There's also the new rune setup consisting of fleet footwork along with cashback and jack of all trades that is winning at an absurd rate right now. The hybrid build of Spear of Shojin, Liandry's, and Riftmaker is really strong now too, and it's outperforming full AP. So especially if you are Emerald or below right now, we would definitely recommend giving Shyvana a go with this new setup. It's a pretty light patch in regards to mid lane changes for 14.13, as there are 3 champs being adjusted. Lissandra is going to receive a couple of buffs, as her QAP ratio is being increased from 80 to 85%. W cooldown is buffed as well, going from 12 scaling to 8 seconds to 10 scaling to 8 seconds. W change is actually pretty nice when you're playing against melee mids, as the shorter cooldown will limit the window in which the enemy can actually look to jump onto you. This will in turn allow Lissandra to play a bit more aggressive more often in lane. We've had Liss in the mid lane B tier for quite some time now, but as a result of these buffs, we see her fitting in as a good A tier pick. Laning strength of Orianna is going to be buffed for 14.13, as she's been getting an extra 4 base AD. The auto attack harass with Ori's passive becomes stronger now, and you'll definitely feel this buff when playing up against melee mids that you can poke out consistently. Even when in a ranged matchup to where you won't be autoing as much, the added AD to help you farm a bit easier is a nice bonus as well. It's tough to say exactly how much power Ori is going to gain from this buff, and considering she's been one of the weakest mids for a while now, we are hesitant in moving her significantly up the tier list, but a push out of C and into B is what we see fit. It looks like Brand's time on top of the mid lane meta may be coming to an end for 14.13. Passive mana on kill is being lowered from 30 scaling to 50 to 20 scaling to 40. E damage is nerfed as well, going from 60 scaling to 180 to 60 scaling to 160. Definitely not the end of the world for Brand, but we do expect him to lose his OP tier standing moving forward, so we're going to be dropping him into S. It's not really the direct champion changes that are going to influence mid the most this patch, as changes to Electrocute and Dark Harvest will be the most interesting to track. With Brand moving out of the the OP tier, it's now going to be Vex and Neferi as the only OP tier mids. We're moving LeBlanc up into the mid lane S tier for this patch, as she's been on the rise in recent patches and should only be getting better due to the electrocute changes. LeBlanc is one mid who can really take advantage of the electro buffs, as she wants to be trading very consistently early on in lane, so the added damage and lower cooldown help her out a ton. Fizz should also be liking the electrocute buffs, as his level 3 all-in strength will be getting better for this patch, and we're going to be bumping him into S tier as well. Misfortune has been a bottom tier ADC in recent patches, so Riot has a few buffs planned for her. Base AD is going up from 52 to 55, which is actually a pretty big buff. W minimum movement speed is being increased from 25 flat to 30, scaling to 50. W max movement speed is up as well, from 50 scaling to 95 to 60 scaling to 100. The time in which it takes to gain the max movement speed is dropping from 10 to 7 seconds. So overall, MF is going to be a little more mobile for next patch, while packing a bit of added damage as well. We definitely don't expect for Misfortune to remain in the lower percentile after these buffs, so we're giving her a push into the ADC A tier. The second ADC who's going to be buffed for this patch is Xayah. E cooldown is being reduced from 13 scaling to 9 seconds to 12 scaling to 8 seconds. E damage is going up as well by 5 at all ranks. We don't see these buffs being quite as impactful as the ones MF received, so we'll be leaving Xayah in the ADC B tier for the time being. Kalista is being targeted with a couple of nerfs, so you're definitely going to want to stay away from her for solo queue. Base AD is going down from 61 to 59. R cooldown is being increased from 150 scaling to 90 seconds to 160 scaling to 120 seconds. W minimum damage and minion execute damage will no longer exist for next patch, as Riot's removing them from Kalista's kit. Monster cap damage is going down as well. So considering we've already had Kalista rated as a C tier champ for solo queue, there's nowhere further for her to drop down the tier list, but we'd highly advise to stay away from her unless you're masters or above. Riot will be trying to push Varus away from lethality builds in 14.13 and towards on-hit setups. They'll be doing this by lowering his base AD from 60 to 57, while attack speed growth is going from 4 to 3.5%. W on-hit damage is going up from 7 scaling to 31 to 7 scaling to 35, so even though you're losing the base AD, which will hurt lethality builds and the early game power of Varus, if you're going for on-hit and have W maxed out, your autos will be dealing more damage than before. W cooldown refund is buffed as it's being increased from 12 to 13%. W plus Q cast lockout is going from 0.25 to 0.85 seconds. W plus Q missing health damage is now going to scale based on W rank instead of by level. Passive is being changed in a big way, as instead of just receiving attack speed, you're now going to be getting less attack speed, but in exchange, some AD and AP. The AD and AP that you get from the passive will scale off of attack speed, so there's much more value to building on-hit Varus now. Where Varus lands power-wise for next patch is hard to predict, but what we can say for certain is that on-hit builds will now become stronger than lethality. Especially with the nerfs to opportunity, there's even less incentive to build lethality now. As long as players adapt to the on-hit builds and don't keep spamming opportunity rush, we see Varus being in a good spot for next patch, so we'll be moving him into the A tier. The general outlook on the ADC meta will not be shifting very much for 14.13, as the top tier picks from last patch will continue to dominate. We will be making one adjustment, as Kai'Sa is moving into the OP tier to join Jhin and Jinx. Kai'Sa has been performing so much better as of recent, with Shiv back in meta and with Barrier being an optimal secondary summoner spell for her. We did note in one of our previous tier lists that you need to be taking Barrier on ADCs now, but it's still actually quite undervalued by the general player base. For example, almost every single pro Jinx player has swapped to running Barrier, but Ghost has remained the much higher pick rate spell in solo queue. The craziest thing as well is that Barrier literally wins 3% more than Ghost, so it's not even like Ghost is the better solo queue option. Even on someone like Jhin, who had been one of the better Ghost users in the past, Barrier is outperforming by 2%. So do yourself a favor this patch and give Barrier a go on your ADCs, as it's still being underplayed despite its heavy priority by pro ADCs. Riot has decided to completely neglect the support role for 14.13, as we have a grand total of 0 direct champion changes for the role. So let's jump right into the tier list, as there's honestly not much new to talk about. Supports that can abuse the Warmog's rush are going to be who you want to prioritize the most right now, as Leona is one of the best, while Poppy, Braum, and Rell are all extremely powerful as well. Poppy is definitely the most underrated support in the game right now, so if you like those more off-meta picks, definitely look to take advantage of her before she becomes super popular and eventually gets nerfed. If melee supports are not your cup of tea, then when it comes down to ranged champs right now, Nami is definitely highest priority after her recent buffs. It will be very interesting to see how the Dark Harvest changes influence the strength of poke supports like Xerath, Lux, Vel'Koz, Brand, and Zyra. We won't be moving them anywhere on the tier list for now, but if the rune does end up increasing any of those champions' power levels, we'll be sure to update you during the mid-patch tier list. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, testing, and top-tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So that's going to wrap everything up for the 14.13 solo queue tier list. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you back soon.